Celebrating 44 years on the air, Farmweek is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week, farmers say they should have the right to repair their own farm equipment, but that's not always the case. Plus, is it a legitimate cause or just a fundraising tactic? States react to environmental claims. In southern gardening, things get a little shady, but there's more to that story. And in our feature, we're headed to the salt mines, family style. Farm Week starts right now. Hello everybody, I'm Mike Russell. Good to have you with us today on Farm Week. Planting season well underway as farmers prep the soil. Inevitably, some farmers will experience tractor breakdowns. What happens after that is at the center of an ongoing debate about who can do what repairs to the equipment supposedly owned by those farmers. Peter Tubbs has the story.
Farmers throughout agriculture have grown frustrated with their inability to repair some of their farm equipment simply because they are not allowed to diagnose error codes their tractors or combines generate. Manufacturers limit that information to trained service techs from dealerships. Bills in Nebraska and 8 other state legislatures are looking to allow farmers access to the data they need to fix their equipment themselves. Just as drivers can scan the error codes of their cars to diagnose problems, farmers would be able to triage problems in the field rather than at the dealership.
It's really interesting that dealerships, by and large, are sort of on the side of the farmers on this, because a lot has changed for them in the last 10 years too. And this is not anti-dealer, this is not anti-OEM. This is just getting back to like it was 20 years ago. When you bought a piece of equipment, you own that piece of equipment.
Problems with a tractor, be them mechanical, electronic, or software related, might put a tractor in limp mode, rendering it unable to do most work until a repair is completed. Many technicians in Nebraska are an hour or more away from area farms. The cost of a service call, which includes drive time, can run several $100s, even if it's just to scan a tractor's operating system. Jeremy Davis runs a repair shop in Palmer, Nebraska. The percentage of repairs he is unable to complete without access to diagnostic equipment has risen to 1/3 of his potential work.
No matter what color the piece of equipment is, they've all got electronic equipment that needs to be calibrated and looked at to figure out what's happening.
The proposed measures would not allow for the bypassing of safety or environmental controls, nor would they reveal intellectual property.
We're not trying to cut dealers out. There's enough work out there for everybody. We just need a little help from the manufacturer to be able to fix things, be able to take care of the customers that they created in the first place.
John Deere, Case IH, and Kubota maintain that limiting access to the software systems and failure codes protects operator safety and ensures that equipment operates within its engineering parameters.
So basically what it comes down to, according to this report from the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, is that the increased presence of software in ag equipment has allowed manufacturers to take control of the repair process at the expense of farmers. And that's something a lot of people are hoping to change. Here in Mississippi, a high-profile legal case that pits residents of the South Delta against environmentalists parallels what's happening in another part of the country. There, in an annual list of so-called endangered waterways, the bitter taste of that declaration doesn't go down easy with locals. Josh Bittner has the story.
Several waterways were found in the crosshairs of the environmental advocacy nonprofit American Rivers. Since the mid-1980s, the Washington, D.C.-based group has compiled an annual list of the top 10 most endangered rivers in the nation.
These have been a tough 12 months. We're dealing with a pandemic. We're dealing with an economic downturn. We're dealing with an important national conversation around inequity and injustice. And I hope that through these challenging times, rivers near you, perhaps rivers you grew up on, have given you a sense of support.
While the Pacific Northwest's Snake River topped the list of impacted riparian communities, drinking water sources, and fish and wildlife habitat, The lower Missouri River, which makes up the majority of Iowa's western border, was the report's second most endangered river. American Rivers cited the ongoing risk of extreme flooding due to poor infrastructure management as the deciding factor. Towns, farmers, and landowners were plagued with $3 billion in flood damage along the corridor in 2019.
That so-called report was a bit of propaganda, I think. It was,
the lower Missouri River designation, as well as the group's first ever placement of Iowa's Raccoon River on the list at 9th, due to runoff from livestock operations in farm fields, drew the ire of the Hawkeye State's Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Naig, who says conservation efforts like cover crops, wetlands, and bioreactors have been accelerating.
The way that those types of reports come out with no basis, they were nominated by an activist group here in Iowa. It's all about it's a fundraising plea for this organization. Again, they can do that. I'm not saying they can't, but if you want to talk facts, you have to ignore a lot of evidence that says we're moving in the right direction, that work is actually getting done every day on the ground.
Now more on that Mississippi case. Recently, the Mississippi Levee Board released a statement slamming American Rivers, whom you saw in that last report. The environmental group and others are suing to prevent the building of a long-promised pump system in the state's Yazoo backwater area. The pumps were promised long before a flood in 2019 that put more than 500,000 acres of residential and agricultural land underwater. Finally, earlier this year, the Army Corps of Engineers signed a document indicating its intention to build that pump system. Almost immediately, lawsuits were filed. We caught up with Andy Gibson, the state's Commissioner of Agriculture, for his reaction.
It is a tragedy that never should be repeated. It's been repeated over and over and over. Our farmers have been flooded out, the communities have been underwater, economies have been destroyed over there. And now that we've finally got a solution through the EPA and through the Army Corps of Engineers, these radical environmental groups from out of the state are suing to try to block the pumps yet again. And it's exactly that kind of thinking that has kept our farmers underwater for decades. And it's time we move past that and get back to the real world. This pump system is not going to hurt anybody. It's not going to hurt any wildlife. It's going to save wildlife. It's going to save habitat. And it's going to save the economy and the farmers of the South Delta. So we need to get it done. I'm very disappointed and very angry about these out-of-state environmental groups that have just time after time used the courts to block life-saving and farm-saving remedies in the state of Mississippi.
Gibson was in Jackson, Mississippi for another story. More on that in a moment. Needless to say, like many, and especially in view of the severity and duration of the 2019 flood, it lasted 7 months, he's a strong proponent of the pump system. Gibson was also on hand for an annual event in Jackson, the donation of more than 20,000 dozen eggs to the Mississippi Food Network from Jackson-based Cal-Maine Foods, the largest producer of shell eggs in the country. The donation was made to help Mississippi families during the continuing COVID-19 pandemic. Cal-Maine operates a flock of 40 million layers and sold more than 1 billion eggs last year. The Food Network has been feeding Mississippians for 37 years and distributes more than 1.5 million pounds of food every month, feeding more than 150,000 people. Its CEO, Charles Beatty, says the donation was critical, especially because of the way the pandemic affected his operation.
In the most negative kind of way that you can imagine. Our people have been getting up and leaning into it and making sure we get the food out. So we've been worried about the pandemic and the coronavirus, but we've been coming to work to get the food out to those who need it. So we've been leaning into it and making it happen.
There are people in our state and in America, as in the United States, all over the country, that do have issues keeping food on the table. Whether it's due to a lack of income, a lack of work, perhaps it's an inability to work, and there are children who, frankly, are going to bed every night that are not getting the proper nutrition that they need. So the Food Network provides a way to make sure those who are truly in need get the food that they need to survive and to grow as individuals and for their families as well.
If you've done the math, you know that 20,000 dozen is more than 250,000 eggs. A portion of those will go to the next Farmer to Families food box distribution, aimed at stamping out hunger in Mississippi. On the shadier side, pun intended, if you're looking for plants that can grow in shade, today's Southern Gardening is for you. Gary Bachman has several types that might not be the landscape equivalent of bling, but they just might give you that tropical feel. Here's Gary.
A group of plants that I don't think gets enough attention are those that love to grow in the shade to partial shade. Now, they're not as flashy as those colorful annuals, but they're still outstanding landscape plants. What do you get when you cross two unrelated plants? The big leaf fatsia with the viney English ivy. You get this fantastically curious intergeneric hybrid plant called Fatshedra. This is the Angiostar selection that is a slow-growing plant having beautiful, richly variegated green, sweet gum-like leaves with creamy white borders. Because of its ivy heritage, it's a semi-upright grower that looks great supported on a trellis. Variegated shelled ginger is a beautiful herbaceous perennial plant that has an overall rounded form. The gorgeous foliage is variegated with irregular stripes of yellow and green, and the arching habit gives it a tropical feel. This is a relatively low-maintenance plant and usually looks best without pruning, although it will tolerate pruning. Another shady plant I love is called Mahonia belii, and it's easy to see why it's commonly called leatherleaf Mahonia. Fragrant yellow flowers and loose spreading racemes bloom in late winter to early spring. Waxy green fruit follow the flowers and hang in grape-like clusters and mature to blue-black in late spring to early summer. The fruit is attractive to birds. When planning your landscape, don't forget about these great shady plants. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and we'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a break right here, but don't go away. Coming up on our Farm Week feature, it's literally a salt of the earth story, 400 million years in the making. In West Virginia, a family business that goes back 7 generations, revived in modern times by a brother and sister intent on being part of the farm-to-table movement. What started as a 400-pound test has grown to a spicy harvest of 10 tons. We're headed to the salt mines. That's coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
At Mississippi State University, Extension is reaching beyond the college campus and impacting adult education. We're instructing agricultural professionals on the latest trends in research and technology, inspiring communities, empowering small businesses, and promoting the growth of healthy families where youth and adults can reach their fullest potential.
The MSU Extension Service, sharing our vision for the future.
ATVs are a ton of fun for people of all ages, but these powerful machines can also be a ton of trouble if safety guidelines aren't followed. Never carry more than one person on a single ride or four-wheeler. The four-wheeler can become unstable and very dangerous. ATVs are designed for off-road use only. Never drive one on a highway or any other paved surface, and always ride the right size machine at the right speed. This message brought to you by MSU Extension 4-H.
It's a simple idea. Knowledge that transforms lives shouldn't be limited to those on a campus, but extended to any and all who want or need it, wherever they are. At Mississippi State University, we've been making that possible for more than 100 years through the MSU Extension Service. What began as an effort to extend the latest research to farmers has become something much more. Today, we're helping Mississippians from all walks of life, giving them the tools they need to build a brighter future. We're sparking the imagination of students around the state and inspiring the next generation of doctors. We're helping rural communities find their way to the internet and connect to the world at large. And we're teaching families how to lead healthier lives in ways both big and small. MSU is standing firm in its commitment to that one simple idea: extend the knowledge that transforms lives wherever they are.
Time once again for the Farm Week Market Report with Zach Ashmore. Zach?
Thanks, Mike. Once again, markets up, but this time, livestock didn't follow. Weather a reason for that. Brazil seeing drought while Northwest U.S. anticipating a freeze. That's right, a freeze this late into the spring. Let's take a look. Last week's biggest loss, lean hogs by about 5 cents. Exports the reason, according to Farm Journal, 1/4 the amount 3 weeks ago. A classic case of demand not meeting supply. Last week's biggest gain, lumber again, this time by about $169. Even more interesting was soybeans and wheat, rising about 20 cents and 16 cents respectively. As I said, weather the reason, drought in Brazil hampering soybeans, and a freeze coming to U.S. wheat country that could damage the winter crop. So let's see how we got here, at least in part. First quarter 2021 revolved around supplies, exports, acres, and thinking about planting season. Lots of back and forth, and markets responded dramatically. Here's what happened.
Early January, we were talking about exports, specifically to China. Throughout the winter, they began scooping up grains in big buys. On top of that, though, was the WASDE report, supplies and stocks for corn and soybeans the biggest factor at that time.
On this final report, usually it's a little bit more measured. You take the yield down to 3.8 bushels an acre on the corn. Really what it signals our demand is too strong for the supplies that we have right now and that we have to ration. So it's one that's work in progress, but what it really did is set the tone going into February now for the next month. We have a whole new set of supply-demand factors that are bullish again. So the bull gets fed after this report, and consequently you had a strong move up this last week.
You dropped quarterly stocks, December 1st stocks, 600 million bushels. We just dropped the crop 325 on 2020. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. I mean, obviously, 2 quarterly stocks reports in a row, you lose 600 million bushels total, I guess, out of the 2019 crop. Very interesting, but regardless, what's going to drive it moving forward? I guess, in my opinion, you have to obviously keep an eye on South American weather. We know that, but we are going to be setting a crop insurance price here before too long. And I think there's going to be a battle for acreage. And, the battle for acreage the last few years has been a hot potato type game. But this year, I think we're actually vying for acres. And I do think that at this stage of the game, it's pretty tough to get down on these markets, considering what we've got going on from a stocks to usage ratio, both for corn and beans.
At the end of January, we got the cattle on feed report, the effects carrying over to February, along with that month's WASDE dropping on the 9th. Both reports having their usual effect on market forces, namely a rise in livestock prices followed by a decline as grains continued to push up.
Well, I've seen estimates as high as 97 million acres on corn. The bean numbers, you look at the corn-bean ratio, it's about 2.6 on new crop beans and corn right now. Certainly an incentive to plant some beans. But I think it's going to be a case, as it always is, what's the weather in the spring? If we've got great weather in the spring, farmers are going to get in and plant corn, and they'll plant 95, 96 million acres of corn, and the rest will go into beans.
We're looking at higher grain prices right now, and that certainly impacts livestock prices, not just cattle prices, but anything that consumes feed to grow. But, cattle, there is some flexibility throughout the cattle production system, and producers are going to make adjustments in response to these higher prices. And at the cow-calf and stocker levels, we're likely going to see a shift towards more forage-based production, maybe some other feedstuffs, some alternative feedstuffs. Anything to find a cheaper way to add some pounds to these cattle at that stage. We're going to see that through prices for different weight cattle. So I suspect that the pressure is going to be most heavily seen on the price of lightweight feeder cattle, more so than the heavier weight cattle. And that's, again, a direct result of the higher feeding costs that feedlots are going to be facing.
Finishing up with March, we saw a decline in row crops followed by significant gains. Lean hogs also on the rise. A major reason for both had to do with exports, namely to China. We also took a deeper look into cotton and what we could look forward to this year.
What we're seeing is that here since the 1st of January, we've seen prices for cotton scoot up higher than any other crop except soybeans. We'll maintain our acreage. We'll maintain our acreage in Mississippi. We'll maintain our acreage in the Delta. We may have a slight increase. I know grains, corn are going to be awfully strong, but cotton belt-wide, we're going to have a very nice acreage, but we need it. Demand is there. We're sitting today looking at prices of about 85 cents a pound basis the futures market. We had a meeting yesterday and the marketing experts told us all to expect 95 cents. I was the low guy. I was only about 92, 93 cents. The other guys were 95, 96, 97 cents basis the December cotton futures contract. And that's what farmers look at when they begin to think about planting and as the year progresses. I think we've got an outstanding year.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. Been an interesting year so far. Looks like that'll continue. Mike?
Thanks, Zach. In this week's feature, ag businesses often get handed down, but the dreams of descendants can take the original business idea off course. By the time the family's seventh generation comes along, the original operation might need spicing up or the dream dies altogether. In this story by Peter Tubbs, a brother and sister went back to the proverbial salt mines to reboot a dormant business.
The 400 million year journey of this artisanal salt ends at a pair of tweezers. Impurities and debris are meticulously pulled from the product before packaging at the J.Q. Dickinson Salt Works in Kanawha County, West Virginia.
It's been an amazing personal and professional journey to bring back this business for my brother and myself, and we really, you feel the weight of those 7 generations kind of watching you.
Nancy Bruns is the 7th generation of her family to make salt in the Kanawha River Valley. The family business began in the early 1800s by boiling water drawn from the ancient Lapidus Ocean. Sitting 300 feet below the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, the 400 million year old brine is pumped into pools covered by hoop barns and dried using energy from the sun. The trip from brine to jar takes 5 weeks, with the brine being dried 3 times. The salt gathered by hand, and the salt crystals sorted and sifted into different sizes for packaging. The Bruns family has been exploring new markets for their product and taken advantage of the growing interest in specialty foods.
Consumers and chefs around the country really wanted locally made, high-quality products. The so-called farm-to-table movement, as well as there are very few salt makers in the U.S. who make it by natural evaporation, solar evaporation, and I saw a real opportunity there.
The salt industry thrived in this corner of West Virginia in the 19th century and was the state's biggest consumer of coal before the Civil War. Pork processors in Cincinnati were the primary destination of salt from the Kanawha River Valley. Production of salt from West Virginia declined in the years after World War II as underground salt mining became more economical. The Dickinson family moved into mineral extracts to keep the company afloat until the 1980s. Nancy and her brother Louis revived the family business by targeting specialty foods in 2013.
It's a really bright, bold flavor. You actually end up using less because it's a strong flavored salt. And the texture of it is very unique. It's not hard like rock salt, and it's not soft and flaky. It's got a nice crunch, but it's a delicate crunch, and it really adds a nice pop of flavor in your food that's unlike any other salt in the world.
The flavor and crunch found a fan base among chefs and food lovers across the country. The market is split between wholesale and retail customers, and consumers can purchase directly from the company. Sales have increased at the same rate that production has expanded. The initial 400-pound test harvest has grown to an annual production of over 20,000 pounds of salt. The only limits to output are the number of sunny days in the Kanawha Valley between March and October. Their over-the-counter business sees many of the same challenges faced by other niche food marketers, including the need to convince customers to pay a price premium for an otherwise readily available product.
Once people understand that a naturally made sea salt is better for you, the mineral content is good for you, and the difference in the flavor it makes on your food, they don't go back. So if you can just get it in their hands and in their kitchens, they're really loving it, and they don't turn back to the big guys.
To greater diversify their marketing plan, J.Q. Dickinson Salt Works is also a popular event space for weddings and gatherings, providing revenue when the business would otherwise be closed. The company also hosts a monthly dinner series with regional chefs that support local nonprofits and a salt festival in September. Overall, reviving a business created by earlier generations has been a rewarding second career for the siblings.
And here we are on the same land where they made salt for so many years, and it's an unbelievable experience. And even though we're doing it very, very differently than they did it, it's actually something that's brought our larger family together because we have this joint history and now it's alive again.
Managing risk, a lot easier said than done, especially right now. Well, next week, big-time changes in the way some farmers grow their crops. Imagine a farm that's only 400 square feet, uses only 8 gallons of water a day, grows a variety of crops without the sun, with a crop cycle from seed to harvest in 8 weeks. Can you actually make a living this way? Yes, you can, and we'll meet an urban farmer harvesting his way into the hearts of his customers. That's next time on Farm Week. Before we go, you heard from Mississippi Ag Commissioner Andy Gibson earlier in the show with that big egg donation in Jackson. Gibson is nothing if not enthusiastic. Listen to this clip from that press conference.
Now, when it comes to eggs, I'm a real big fan, all right? Whether you like them fried, or scrambled, or poached, or boiled, over easy, sunny side up, or in an omelet, there's nothing like the incredible edible egg. Can I get an amen right there?
Amen, brother. Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.